Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Business Builder Speaker Series. The Business Builder Speaker Series was an idea that was born out of COVID in 2020. When we couldn't get together in person, we had the idea, let's get together once a month on Zoom, bring a speaker on a topic of value to real estate agents. Although it's great information, it's only a 1 hour seminar, so it isn't for CE credit. We host the Business Builder Speaker Series the third Wednesday every month from 1 to 2 p.m. to get great tips and tricks from our industry experts to help you grow your real estate business. We encourage you to connect with us on the various social media. Our Business Builder Speaker Series, we record each of them. We clean them up, add the credits and the theme music at the beginning and the end. Then we post them to our YouTube channel and link to them on our website. On our website, under the Resource tab, you'll find Business Builder Series and links to not only this class, but all of our prior classes in the series. This is a summary of our 2024 Business Builder Speaker Series classes to date. You'll find all of them in the Resource tab on our website, which links back to the YouTube channel where the videos are actually hosted. Mark your calendar for next month. Our Business Builder Speaker will be November 20th at 1 p.m. That's the third Wednesday in November. Our speaker will be Gordon Owens, who's the owner of Go Digital. His company assists businesses with leveraging technology, and he'll be speaking on leveraging technology to stay in front of clients. Learn how to utilize today's advanced technology to stay front and center of your client business and grow your in front of your client base and grow your business. And that'll be Wednesday, November 20th at 1 o'clock. We thank you for joining us. We know you're busy. We appreciate you giving us your time. To make the most of your time, we encourage you to ask questions and to participate utilizing the chat box. We're delighted today to have Dana Sparks, broker at Maximum One Greater Atlanta, speaking about the wild world of agent compensation, navigating recent changes in our industry. When it comes to real estate broker compensation, the NAR preliminary settlement has changed the rules, and GAR has changed the equipment. In this month's Business Builder Series, Dana Sparks, qualifying broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta, will address how agents can win the compensation game and be able to manage all these changes. And we are delighted to have Dana Sparks join us as our speaker today on the Business Builder Speaker Series. Thank you very much, Dana, and we will turn it over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Doug. I appreciate your having me. It is always an honor to work with you personally and Shay Fritz and Dean generally. And I'm just excited and honored to talk about some of the crazy changes. Just so you know, this is being recorded in October of 2024, as I am told that the Georgia Association of Realtors is going to change these compensation forms again in 2025. Based on guidance from the National Association of Realtors. So if you are watching this in 2024, this information hopefully will be extremely pertinent to you and how to use which forms when. If you are watching this in 2025, I imagine the order will be the same, but how to fill out which form might be a little different. So just make sure to check with the most current version of the GAR contract package, depending upon when you are watching this video. But this video, what I'm going to present today, Doug, is not how to complete all of these forms. We'd be here for forever, but just a chart. I'm going to walk through a chart that helps you as a broker and an agent navigate. GAR has so many forms that address broker compensation, seller broker compensation, as well as agent broker compensation. And I just came up with a chart that I want to share to help agents and brokers navigate which form, which GAR document to use in which situation, and just as a guideline to help with that.
Thank you, Dana. We'll post a link to that chart here in the slide. In the Business Builder Speaker Series video, you should see a link to where this chart can be found online. Additionally, Dana, we'll post a footer note at the early in the video that this video was recorded in October of 2024. It should be accurate for the remainder of 2024, and there will be additional changes in 2025. So we'll make that comment early in the video so people will have a frame of reference for our conversation today.
Awesome. That sounds terrific, Doug. Thank you. I want to cover the contract form changes that here in Georgia, the Georgia Association of Realtors has at this point in time, and this is being recorded in case you're watching this later, October of 2024. So we do have various contract forms from the Georgia Association of Realtors to help us as agents and brokers address broker compensation from our public. I am of the understanding that in 2025, all of these compensation forms, not all, but the majority of these will undergo further revision and changes. So if you are watching this video and you are in 2025, more than likely there are changes that have been made. But if you are watching this video in 2024, this will be appropriate and applicable to you. So there is a lot I could cover, and we could be here for hours and hours and hours. So what I am going to address in today's Business Builder is not how to complete each one of the forms that GAR has available for us in the contract package, but just when to use which form, because that gets extremely complicated for our agents. And I just want to simplify things a little bit and share a chart with you. So Doug, if you could give me the capability to share my screen, I will do that and we can dive in.
Dana, give it a shot. I thought I had made you a co-host, so it should
Okay,
allow you to share.
perfect. Let me try. I'm going to put my glasses on so I don't squint the whole time. So you might see the reflection in my glasses, but let me share my screen and we shall get started. There we go. Can y'all see my screen share?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. All right. This is a form. I am also the director of the Real Estate Academy of America. And this is a form that we have come up with at the school that we share through the continuing education classes that we teach on contracts, on the NAR preliminary settlement, on license law, on all sorts of things. And I am so proud and honored that Doug Dean is one of our instructors through our school, the Real Estate Academy of America. So thank you, Doug, for helping us out and teaching classes through that school. Moving
Pleasure.
along. Okay, so this again, I have up here as of July 1st, 2024. The reason I have that date is that was the date of the latest revision of the contract package forms from the Georgia Association of Realtors. These forms, again, will be tweaked in 2025, but for the rest of this year, this is what we have, and I want to go over how to navigate these forms. So this chart, and Doug, I will link it in the chat so that, let me see if I can do that now. Here we go. I think I can attach this to the chat. so that everybody could actually have a copy of it. I'm not sure how to.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm, I'm not sure how to do this right now. Okay. I'm not sure how to do that, so I will get back to that. Let me go back. I lost my screen. I'll go back and figure that out, or I'll email it to you, Tracy or Doug, and y'all can share it in your chat because I'll do that in a little bit.
We
So,
can certainly do that.
okay, perfect. So anyway, the a couple of things to think about, and then I want to go over how to read this chart. And you all, anybody attending this or watching this video is more than welcome to share this. And I will email it to Doug at Schaefer and Dean, and you guys can attach it in the video that you link on your YouTube channel so people can download it from there. So the first thing to think about, the column on the left is broker's compensation. So when we work with the public to buy or sell a house, the public seller pays a broker to help them market and sell and close their house. And the public buyer pays a broker to help them navigate everything involved with purchasing a home, from getting pre-qualified, searching, inspecting, all that kind of things, appraisals, all those, getting title insurance, and then going to closing. There are fees to hire professionals for those services. So the left-hand column is broker's compensation. What document is the financial obligation between the public buyer and seller negotiated and agreed upon between the public and the broker? And then further on down that column is, where is that financial obligation confirmed? And then where is that financial obligation summarized? So the next column is, how does a seller's broker get paid? A seller's broker gets paid. There can be a few exceptions, but basically, a seller's broker only gets paid from the public seller. The seller pays the listing broker, and that's where the compensation comes from, to the seller's broker or the listing broker. That's the second column. The next three columns, however, have to do with how a buyer's broker gets paid. A buyer's broker, the broker that a public buyer chooses when they choose a broker to represent them in the purchase of a home, they can get paid from one of three ways. They can get paid solely from the buyer who hires them. They can get paid from the seller's broker or the listing broker in what we traditionally have referred to as a co-op financial arrangement, a co-op arrangement, co-op pay, where it is just money coming from the seller's broker to the buyer's broker. Or the buyer's broker can get paid directly from the seller. So again, the seller's broker gets paid just from the seller. The buyer's broker gets paid one of three ways. The fact that the buyer's broker can get paid one of three ways is what accounts for the variety of the compensation forms in the GAR contract package. So let's go through this chart a little bit more in depth, and let me show you how to read it and what forms to use in what situation. So again, the financial obligation between the public and the broker whom they hire or choose to work with, either as a client or a broker, that financial obligation is negotiated and created. And this is the foundation. The money that gets negotiated here is the foundation, and all the other forms must match this consumer financial obligation. So let's start with the seller side. A public seller finds a broker to work with them to list and sell their house and take them to closing. that financial obligation, how much they are going to pay that broker for that job, for the professional real estate services of selling their home, is negotiated and agreed to and binding on one of three documents. Either the exclusive seller brokerage agreement, which is the GAR F101, the non-exclusive seller brokerage agreement, which is the GAR F104, or at GAR F107, the authorization to show unlisted property. So these first two documents, the brokerage agreements, the public seller is going to sign one of those if the relationship between the public seller and the broker is that of client. If you are working with the seller as a client, both of these create the client relationship. It just depends if that client relationship is going to be exclusive between that seller and your brokerage or non-exclusive. So it would still be a client relationship between that public seller and your brokerage and another brokerage and another brokerage. Nevertheless, those two create the client relationship here in Georgia. By default, a public person working with a broker is a customer. This document, the authorization to show unlisted property, doesn't create the customer relationship. They're already your broker's customer by default, but it describes the customer relationship between the public seller and the broker. This is most often used when a broker is working with a seller that is for sale by owner. And there is the compensation obligation negotiated and created and agreed to in this form. Because the seller's broker only gets paid, generally speaking, from the seller, there's no other place where you need to confirm that. And I'll get to the summarization in a little bit. Now, let's go to the buyer side. When a public buyer hires a broker, and just parenthetically, they're working with an agent, but an agent is an affiliated licensee with a broker. And all contracts are in the name of the broker. All forms are in the name of the broker. All compensation goes to the broker. And then the broker pays their affiliated licensee by virtue of their independent contractor agreement. So that's why I keep using the term broker, even though you might be watching this and you're an agent. Your broker has to get paid in order for your broker to be able to pay you. And because contracts are all in the name of the broker, that's why I'm using the term broker. So a buyer, when a buyer chooses a broker with whom to hire for the professional services of helping them with everything involved in buying a home, that financial obligation is negotiated and created on one of three forms. Same things. These are going to look familiar like they do on the seller side. Either the F110 in the GAR contract package, the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, or the F113, the non-exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, or the F116, agreement to work with broker as a customer. Again, in Georgia, the client relationship is contractually driven. So if you're going to work with a public buyer as a client, that client must sign a brokerage agreement, either exclusive and you are the only broker with whom they are working, or the non-exclusive and they still have a client relationship with you, but they may also have signed a non-exclusive buyer brokerage agreement with another broker and would have a client relationship with that broker as well. And just like with a seller, by default, a public person who chooses you for the professional services to help them buy a home, by default, a buyer is a customer. They don't have to sign anything to create that customer relationship. They are a customer if they do not sign a brokerage agreement. So GAR, Georgia Association of Realtors, has Form F116, agreement to work with broker as a customer, that describes the customer relationship between the public buyer and the broker whom they choose to help them buy a house. Now, the difference is ministerial act, so forth and so on. That goes above and beyond the scope of today's presentation. Nevertheless, in all three of these documents, there is a place to negotiate the compensation that a public buyer will pay a broker for the professional services of helping them purchase a home. This amount of money that a buyer agrees to pay for those services is negotiated and agreed to in a binding agreement on one of these forms. Any other form to confirm this obligation must match what is created. This is the foundation for the money that the broker gets for working with that buyer. So now let's go to the second row. And the financial obligation is created just from the seller and just from the buyer. There's no financial obligation created to a buyer's broker from a seller or from the co-op broker. It's just from the public people themselves. So now let's look at the second row. This is where the financial obligation that was created in one of these documents is confirmed. I have a couple of notes here for you. The forms are based on, the form you're going to use in a contract is based upon who is paying the compensation. And another note for you, the party who is paying the compensation must sign the form. So as you've heard all the time, especially if you've been in any of my classes, if it is not in writing, it does not exist. So not only must it be in writing, it must be signed by the party paying the compensation. So again, for the seller, they have already created and signed their obligation. Nobody else is paying the seller's broker, so there's no additional form to confirm that. As we mentioned at the beginning, a buyer's broker, however, can get paid one of three ways. The financial obligation, how much they're going to get paid, is created by the buyer. Who is paying that? It depends. They can be paid directly from the buyer with no other party involved. And so again, if the buyer's broker is being paid from the buyer, nobody else involved, there's no other form that needs to be included in a purchase and sale agreement. And this is very typical if an agent or a broker is working with an investor. There are a lot of investors that will pay the buyer's broker directly and not request or rely on the seller side to pay their broker. So very common for investors. There's no other form needed in a purchase and sale agreement to confirm that obligation, because that would have been created. The obligation is created in one of those buyer brokerage agreements or customer agreements. However, we have two additional ways that a buyer's broker can get compensated for the professional service of helping a buyer buy a house. One is from the seller's broker in a co-op situation, which is what we typically have been used to here in Georgia for several years. So traditionally, what we have done is the seller has agreed to pay their broker a big pile of money, and their broker has agreed to share part of that money with a broker working with a buyer. And that's what we refer to as a co-op deal, co-op situation. And what we are used to doing here in Georgia is confirming that on the GAR F255, Instructions to Closing Attorney. And generally speaking, that document is not part of I'm down here, I'm starting at the end. I should have started at the top, but I'm starting at the end. That document is not part, generally speaking and traditionally, of the purchase and sale agreement, because it has nothing to do with the buyer and the seller's contract for the house. This is just an agreement between the two brokers, and traditionally it is signed traditionally between the buyer's agent and the seller's agent or brokers, because the compensation is going just from the listing broker to the buyer's broker. So that one you're used to using.
Dana, if I can jump in real quick.
Sure.
We had a question and I've tabled it till we hit the 255. The
Okay.
question is when you're co-oping with an agent, if the seller had already agreed to pay a commission, which the selling broker would share with the buyer's broker, then the 255 does not need to be signed by the seller. But as I think we'll see in the next block on the chart, if the seller had only agreed to pay their own broker, but later agreed, then they would sign the 255. Am I stating that correctly?
Absolutely. And that's why I have that note over here on the left. The party paying must sign the form. So in July, GAR altered those instructions to closing attorney a little bit, and now there's a seller signature line, and it's sort of confusing at first. And that's why I came up with this chart to hopefully alleviate that confusion. If it is a traditional co-op compensation arrangement where the buyer's broker is getting paid from the seller's broker, the seller does not need to sign the instructions to closing attorney. That is just how you've always done it. It is just signed by both agents, and it is not even part of the contract. So I'll address that a little bit more explicitly when I get to the next section from the seller directly. So back to just talking about other ways that if the buyer's broker is getting compensated from the seller's broker. So another way is through this form F258, pre-showing compensation agreement. And again, I've got copies of these other forms, but I think this is a little bit above and beyond the scope of today's presentation. Doug, I'd be more than happy to come back and go over how to fill out these forms a little bit more in depth. We teach these in our classes. Again, these are going to change in January, but I just wanted to really today cover what form to use when. And in the interest of time, I'm going to take up enough time just going over this. But the pre-showing compensation agreement is exactly what it says. It's very similar to the instructions to closing attorney. However, again, the situation we're talking about is the buyer's broker is getting paid from the seller's broker. So before you ever show a house to a buyer, the brokers, the agents would fill out this pre-showing compensation agreement where the listing broker agrees to pay the buyer's broker a certain amount of money should that buyer end up buying the house and they close on that house. So that could be negotiated on the pre-showing compensation agreement. And in this instance, if it's just money coming between the brokers, again, it is only signed between the brokers. Neither public buyer nor public seller would sign that form in that situation. There's one other form where the financial obligation to a buyer's broker is confirmed, and that is a new form that GAR came out with on July 1st, 2024. And that is the GAR F259 Broker Compensation Agreement Exhibit. What do we know about an exhibit? We know that an exhibit is part of a contract. So if you are an agent working with a buyer and you show a house to a buyer and you have no knowledge of any compensation coming to you, the buyer's broker, from the seller's side, you have not completed a pre-showing compensation agreement. You don't have that signed. You don't have instructions to closing attorney signed. One of the ways what you would include is you would include this exhibit, broker compensation agreement exhibit. And that is where you can fill out compensation coming from the seller's broker to the buyer's broker, it would be part of the purchase and sale agreement because it's an exhibit. In this instance, buyer's agent and seller's agent would sign it because that's where the money is coming from. Additionally, because it's an exhibit, the buyer and seller are also going to initial or sign this form because it's an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement. Now, let's move on to the next column. This is if a buyer's broker is getting compensated. How much? We know how much based on what the buyer's obligation, that's the foundation for the compensation to the buyer's broker. But if the buyer's broker is getting paid directly from the seller, there are a number of ways that that gets confirmed. Before I move on, let me point out something also very important. I have these little words or. It's not and, it's or. You only need this form or this form or this form to confirm this financial obligation. If you have a pre-showing compensation agreement signed, you do not also need this exhibit. It's one or the other, okay? Now, I'm going to get down to the instructions to closing attorney in just a moment, but I just wanted to point out that's very important. That gets really confused right now in our marketplace is we have a lot of agents using multiple forms when it's not necessary. Okay, moving along to the third column. If a buyer's broker is getting compensation from the seller directly, there is a place right now on the pre-showing compensation agreement where a seller can indicate that they are going to compensate the buyer's broker directly. However, that doesn't really make sense because if a seller agrees to pay a buyer's broker directly, generally speaking, they're going to wait and determine the amount of that compensation based upon the buyer's offer. So now you're thinking, wait a minute, Dana, I'm really confused. I thought you said the amount is already created up here from the buyer. Yes, you are correct. So if the buyer agreed to a certain amount, the seller could pay part or all of that amount. If the seller is only paying part of that amount, then the seller agrees to that here, and the buyer is responsible for the remainder of the amount of money that they agreed to compensate you in the foundation where that was created. So it's not an all or nothing. Money coming to a buyer's broker from a co-op broker or from a seller does not necessarily have to total what the buyer is obligated to pay. It could be total or it could be partial, but just wanted to kind of clear that up a little bit. So back here to this form. Generally speaking, if a buyer's broker is getting part of their compensation or all of their compensation from a seller directly, they're really not going to fill that out on this pre-showing compensation agreement because generally speaking, a seller is going to wait and see what the buyer's offer is. So you have another option. The buyer, if the seller is paying the buyer's broker directly, you would use this, you could use Form F259, the broker compensation agreement exhibit. And there is a place on that exhibit. Again, it's an exhibit, so it's part of the contract. So the seller will know what the other terms of the buyer's offer is in total. There is a place where the buyer can ask the seller to compensate their broker all or part of what they have obligated to pay their broker on this exhibit. And if it's coming from the seller directly, the seller would have to sign. Regardless, the seller has to sign anyway because it's an exhibit to the agreement. Or if the buyer's broker is getting compensated from the seller directly, GAR has a special stipulation. It is special stipulation 620. And let me make this a little bigger. I do have this for you, and this is going to be changed in January as well. But right now, it states that the buyer hereby requests and seller hereby agrees to pay the buyer's broker at closing the following compensation for professional services. And you fill that out either in a flat fee dollar amount, a percent of the purchase price, or other. And then, very important, agents and brokers, don't write this on your own. Use the special stipulation provided by the Georgia Association of Realtors to prevent you from violating license law. And that is, nothing herein shall be interpreted as a request to alter, modify, or change the commission to be received by the seller's broker, if any, that the seller may have agreed to pay in a separate written agreement. This last sentence keeps you from violating this unfair trade practice. So back to my chart. Buyer's broker getting compensated from the seller directly. Pre-showing, but typically you're not going to use that. Could be, I have or again, or in this exhibit, or the buyer can use it as a special stipulation in the purchase and sale agreement. Or we have another way that a buyer's broker can get paid directly from the seller. That has to do with the seller's contribution to the buyer's closing costs. In the GAR purchase and sale agreement, under the section where it is the seller's contribution to the buyer's closing costs, there is a provision that states, at closing, seller shall make the referenced seller's monetary contribution, which the buyer may use to pay any cost or expense of the buyer related to this transaction, including without limitation, any commission obligations of the buyer. There's more verbiage in here. I just have a note. It does require the lender's approval. So of the amount of contribution that a seller is making to the buyer's closing costs, of course, it's going to depend upon how much those closing costs are. If there's any overage, a closing attorney like Doug Dean could apply any overage to a buyer's commission obligation to their broker, and that's how it would show up on the closing settlement statement. So again, that is another way. Or, I have the or, instructions to closing attorney. And I think this has to do with the question in the chat that was a little confusing. In the revision that the Georgia Association of Realtors made to their contract package in July of 2024, they have now added a signature place for the seller. And you'll see it has here. This is where both agents or brokers sign it. And then there's a signature seller. But GAR has a reminder here for us to try to alleviate this confusion. If the seller is paying the buyer broker's compensation reference herein, the seller hereby signs this agreement to reflect the seller's consent for payment. So I have a note here for you. The seller only signs, again, we're on the instructions to closing attorney. The seller only signs this if they are paying the buyer's broker directly. And it most likely would already be agreed upon in either the exhibit or a special stipulation. So again, it is a little bit confusing, but I have one of those places is where the financial obligation is confirmed if the buyer's broker is getting compensated directly from the seller. Now, let me briefly move on to the last row, and then I'll take any questions. The last row is where is all of this financial obligation summarized. And I have in every column instructions to closing attorney. It is a good idea to use the instructions to closing attorney in every contract, in every transaction, regardless of who is paying the broker's compensation. Okay, Dana, why on earth do you say that? Well, a couple of reasons. Because there are a number of places the financial compensation from the public to the brokers is created and confirmed. The instructions to closing attorney is a great single document to summarize all of this. If there is a combination, number one, for the public to make sure everybody knows who's paying what. Number two, for the brokers to make sure who is paying what. Number three, for the pre-closures at the closing attorney's office, so that they get it correct on the closing settlement statement. Because remember, the closing settlement statement has to get approved by a lender. So if for whatever reason, even for example, pre-showing compensation agreement, that's not part of a contract. If agents forget to send that to the closing attorney, a pre-closer may not know to put the compensation from the seller on the HUD on the closing statement, and it could potentially cause major delays at the closing table. So it's a good summary for the closing attorneys. And as a broker, your brokers greatly, greatly appreciate a summary of who is paying what, where, and how. And then we, as brokers checking compliance of a contract, we can go back and check all the other forms and make sure that the appropriate party has signed agreeing to pay that compensation. So again, regardless of where the financial obligation is created, negotiated, and agreed to, regardless of where that financial obligation is confirmed, it is always a good idea to summarize that financial obligation and who's paying what on the instructions to closing attorney. So I'm hoping that this chart will help, again, not an in-depth discussion on how to complete those forms, but help navigate for our brokers and our agents here in Georgia how to use which of the Georgia Association of Realtors compensation forms in what situation in navigating this wide, wild world of broker compensation.
Dana, I'll make a comment and you can tell me if I'm correct or incorrect. The F-255 instructions to closing attorney may not strictly be required when the commission is otherwise documented in the 258, the 259, the special stip, or the F-201. However, doing so, to me, I'm sort of analogizing it to a conformed copy of a sales contract where we've gone back and forth and all the terms are scattered among various counteroffers. And they say, well, let's just do a conformed copy. So I'm going to call that the conformed copy of the commission agreement.
Absolutely. It's just a good place to summarize it. And if compensation has already been agreed to and signed on one of these other forms, you're exactly right, Doug. The instructions to closing attorney are not required and don't need to be signed. And there are many compliance brokers of brokers that are requesting the instructions to closing attorney, and I don't know, you'll have to comment on how Schaefertz and Dean is doing this. Again, as a summary, it doesn't even need to be signed, but just like you said, a conformed copy, or the term we like to use in our brokerage is a checks and balances, just to make sure that nothing is missed, so that everybody is on the same page, and to avoid any delays in closing based on this issue between the public buyer and the public seller.
As a closing attorney, we're always grateful when we get an F-255 ITCA. It's a form we're familiar with, we're accustomed to seeing it, and it summarizes nicely all the commission obligations and who's paying what. Unfortunately, some brokers have taken the position they don't want their agents to do a 255 if the commission obligation is already set up in the 258 or the 259 or so forth. But I would say, as just a point of practice, as a closing attorney, we're always glad to get the 255, the instructions to closing attorney.
Yes, and at Maximum One, Greater Atlanta Realtors, we're asking that from our agents, not even to be part of the contract, but just to upload that in our transaction management system for us, because it's not required. But again, just so we don't miss anything. So yes, yes,
It is a nice
it's just help.
summary.
It's very helpful.
Agreed.
I can't figure out how to do it through Zoom. So I am emailing you a copy of that table that I just presented. Um, it is coming to you now, and you might be able to figure out on your end. There is a way to attach a file to the chat. So Kimberly or anybody else, you can download it now. It's asking to sometimes when I'm on Zoom and it asks me to do it directly from my computer. I don't get that option now. So Tracy, I just emailed that to you. You can upload it to the chat and Doug, y'all can include that in the description of when you post the video on YouTube.
That's fine. We do have a copy of it just from the presentation.
Oh, okay, good.
Is it also available on the web somewhere where we can add a web link?
Sure, absolutely. Let me share my screen one more time. And if you go to the Real Estate Academy, www.realestateacademyofamerica.com, there is a title here, course handouts and videos. If you click on
Yes.
that, my computer is thinking a little bit. I have it right here. There's NAR preliminary settlement and GAR forms. And I've got some other forms here, and anybody is welcome to watch the videos or download any of the forms. Training and education is a huge part of our philosophy at Maximum One, Greater Atlanta, Maximum One companies, as well as Real Estate Academy of America. So we share any and everything we can. But if here it says broker compensation summary of GAR forms, if you click on that, you will get that form I just shared in PDF version. And my computer's a little slow, but you can download it or print it. So anybody has access to that online right now as well.
Let's see if I've done this correctly. If I have, um, I should be able to put that web link directly in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't think about that. I also have it on my YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel, Real Estate Made Crystal Clear. And I have a playlist, NAR settlement, and I've got a video explaining all of that as well as several of the other forms, and I've got it linked there as well. But I didn't think about that.
That way, they've got a direct web link in the
Yeah,
chat to
perfect.
the copy of the handout.
That you're very smart, Doug. So smart.
More than one way to do it. I just found a way that worked. Um, And just in the way of background, Georgia has, in some respects, been ahead of the NAR because our buyer brokerage forms for the last 2 years have already contemplated the buyer being obligated to pay his broker commission and that obligation is reduced by any amount the seller does contribute towards buyer compensation. So our buyer brokerage agreements have for the past 2 years already included the commission obligation, correct?
Several years. Georgia is, as a broker and as a director of the school and an instructor, I have learned way more than I ever knew or knew I didn't know regarding how other states in the country address compensation. And what I am learning is Georgia is way ahead, 10, 15, 20 years ahead of some other states regarding the forms that we have and the public buyers and the public sellers confirming, agreeing to, negotiating, and confirming compensation to their brokers in a document that they sign when they hire a broker to help them with professional real estate services of helping them buy and sell a house. my understanding, it was as of a couple of months ago, so it could have changed, but my understanding is there were only 18 states that even had buyer brokerage laws. And Georgia's had buyer brokerage laws, Beretta, since I believe for 23, 24 years now. So we are way ahead. And I think in Georgia, that is one of the reasons why there's a lot of confusion because for agents here, we're like, I don't understand what's the big deal. Why is there so much hoopla? Why is all this going on? Because these are issues we've been dealing with. Like I said, I've been practicing for 30 years. So these are issues we've addressed contractually and legally here in Georgia for at least 24, 23, 24 years. Um, and and so all of a sudden there's all this national conversation for things that is passe for us, so to speak. Not passe, it's important, but issues that we've always addressed, at least as far as I've been practicing. So things have been
Mhm.
tweaked and changed a little bit here and there, but conceptually and generally speaking, several years, yes. That's my long-winded way of agreeing with you, Doug.
Thank you, Dana. Dana, let's throw it open to the floor for questions. Any other questions about the how compensation is created and documented beyond what we've already covered? If not, I'll say thank you for joining us today. I hope that you walk away with a better knowledge of the various forms, when they're applicable, and why one form might apply in one situation and not in another. So I think, Dana, that was a very helpful chart, and I like the way that it presented that distinction between what creates a compensation and what documents it subsequently.
My
And
pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It has been a joy and Doug, I've known you for several years and I always learn so much and I'm just so honored that you've asked me to be a part of this Business Builder series and just greatly respect you and you've helped me with so many legal issues with real estate and so it's my pleasure to be able to help and contribute in this small way. So thank you for having me.